And so here's a few things I'd like to get off my bow tie and discuss about the world at large, because I don't know if anyone else has looked around the world lately. We've come off the remnants of the coup, a war broke out, petrol and gas prices are rising, as is inflation, and many politicians seem to be beholden to this strange force that appears to inhibit them from admitting men and women have different sexual characteristics, while also wanting more women in certain places, and yet still maintaining that men and women are seemingly interchangeable by what the hell they choose to identify as, which, let's be honest, is inconsistent, insane, and stupid. What a great time to be alive. It's no wonder so many people are losing their freaking minds. And thus, we have a conundrum. I would guess there's a fair few who did not exactly have great faith in humans as a mass, and seeing how they behaved collectively in the face of a worldwide case of the sniffles did not bolster their opinion of their fellow man. If you happen to be of an inquisitive nature, saw the whole world doing the exact same thing, following the lead of a totalitarian regime, and thought, there is no way this is not going to be exploited, you were called crazy and selfish. If you looked at the statistics of the NOD and thought there's something really shady about all of this, you were called some anti-science bigot. If you correctly thought Fauci was a garden gnome gopher driven by money and power with the lust for the camera so deep behind the scenes he likely had sex with it, you were derided because who the hell are you to question him? We had the appeal to authority fallacy on a global scale. It didn't matter if you were listening to an authority carrying an equal or greater educational prestige with an experience besting his. If you were counter to the narrative, you were off basis. So evidently, the authority and information didn't matter, merely who was behind the authority is what drove its validity. And when it all came out as a complete sham and us crazy tinfoil hat-wearing skeptics were right about literally everything, did we get a pat on the back? Did we get an apology? No. No, we didn't. Because a war broke out, and clearly that was more important. Seeing the entire world go from apocalyptic cries of fear and the sky is falling to quick, there's a war, change attention now at the drop of a damn dime was pretty eerie. I thought, holy crap, humans are really easily distracted with quite the short attention span. What freaked me out the most was not how quickly the narrative shifted, but how quickly you could move the masses in a different direction, seemingly overnight, and how easy it was to turn the left pro-war. Towards the end of the coup, there appeared to be some people who were beginning to be skeptical of the machine. I thought if not taken the red pill, at least digested some chunks of it, but nope. The second the war hit, they short-circuited right back to lemming mode and would question no further. Not a surprise to see those who retained their newfound skepticism also extended it towards being anti-war. Congratulations to them, you are the true sages of society. And so the pertinent question after seeing this and becoming aware is, how does one stay sane? First thing to realize is modernity is a pile of arse and democracy is really gay. I'm not suggesting you need to do what I did, start reading neo-reactionary and older world literature and become a monarchist, but the old tomes are there for those who wish to partake. I do think a healthy dose of conceitedness is a good course of action. I'm fully aware that might sound a bit strange, and I'm not suggesting that doing so necessarily facilitates the adoption of condescension in your newfound attitude, merely that you should recognize that the masses are fickle and you should rise above them. If you felt the scorn from going against the grain in the last couple of years, I would wager you can attest as to why it's a good idea to develop a sturdier spine and pay no attention to the plebs. Very much the adoption of the clan can't be arsed elitism outlook. I do think social media exacerbates this problem quite heavily. It's not a place that appreciates the intricacies and nuances, and I do think that's by design. If we take a look at the usage of social media, I think over 90% of the material is generated by less than 10% of the user base. So the vast majority of the consumers are passive users. We've got the classic Pareto distribution. In a traditional human interaction, it's personal, it's face-to-face. You can appreciate their presence, their emotions. There's a physical interaction that propels the creation of dopamine. There's a uniqueness to each interaction due to the media richness. However, in social media, the media richness is largely absent. Everything is text-based. So the only thing that distinguishes any user from the next is a tiny photo and a name because the interaction is lacking the variables that generate the uniqueness. The only tool that facilitates any meaningful interaction on this medium is manifested through a numerical representation in the likes and retweets. And so, users will compensate for the lack of any real-world positive features by chasing a volume of approval vis-a-vis the likes and retweets. And considering the overabundance of passive rather than active users, coupled with heavy-handed censorship, they'll be compelled to mere utterances that will gather group approval from the mass rather than rock the boat, and hence why social media is reduced to nothing but a dulled-out hollow crowd of boring normies. It's an amusing place for verbal shenanigans, sure, but by no means is it a place for fruitful dialogue. I'll give an example of even a YouTube comment going off the rails. This one guy is begging in the comment section to do a video on Scott Horton. He's a libertarian anti-war guy. Apparently his takes are absolute garbage and he'd be really easy to take down. So I watched Scott debate Bill Kristol, who was a foreign policy advisor to John McCain, that says a lot, chief of staff to Dan Quayle, Bush Sr.'s vice president, and a leading proponent of the Iraq War. The topic is U.S. interventionism. Horton knocks the living daylights out of Kristol. It's a one-sided fatality. I'm thinking to myself, Horton mauled a pro-war neocon who was in the U.S. government to smithereens. But you think these two random American yahoos that you watch are somehow going to dismantle Horton's arguments, do you? What juvenile fantasy world you must live in? So I replied to him, or Horton would call you out for the wannabe imperialist that you are. Does it not make you ask why so many disparate political voices are all united against NATO expansion? This guy tries to insult me with what literally looks like a piece of code, which makes the NPC meme that much funnier. After asking him to observe his childishness and how is this helpful, he gets really snotty and tells me he won't take my criticism seriously if I'm stalking the comment section of a channel I debated on weeks ago, trying to debate random commenters to prove to myself that I'm right. I'm there thinking, first off, I didn't criticize you, I asked a question. Fair enough, I called him a wannabe imperialist, but I did also ask a question and he engaged in neither. And how am I stalking the comment section exactly? If I was, why would I be on an account that is known? Surely the whole point of stalking is to not be noticed. This makes no sense. And lastly, you're in a comment section, on your knees, begging for content creators to make a video to reaffirm your position. It's stupidity like this that gives the impression there's no capacity for dialogue centered around civility and common sense. So it's understandable why so many get fed up and vacate into isolationism. But boy, has this current episode delightfully exposed the most fragile of wild creatures, the American ego, which Lady Liberty herself operates with a glass cannon. It can fire well enough, sure, but it is incredibly brittle in the face of any criticism. They really are a curious bunch. You can't criticize America without seeming anti-American to an American. They can't quite grasp that most people don't dislike them as a people for being American. They actually quite like the concept of America as a nation, which makes it all that much funnier when they reflect the failsafe response is some BS about envying their so-called freedom. No, it's the complete lack of adherence to your founding principles and loudmouth bravado with which Americans carry themselves that pisses everyone off. Well, that in your foreign policy is akin to the behavior of a schizophrenic trust fund baby with an army. It's really amusing for the Yanks, who pride themselves on being individualistic, get really collectively outraged in the face of adversity to their giant fat ass destroying the world for its own ends, and they'll be left perplexed by foreigners who happen to like the Americans, who can showcase the ability to be critical of their government's incompetence, especially on foreign affairs, as if it's distasteful for Americans whose nation was founded on limited government to not be fans of its bloated bureaucracy expanding across a global scale. How odd. And we're all familiar with the former cut of American, the type that has never left their country, probably never left their own state, but thinks America is the greatest thing since sliced bread and that they run the world. However, will get really upset when said world takes a closer look and questions the competence of their officials, or inquire why America, land of the free, home of the brave, is internationally renowned as land of the fat, home of the moron. And the American response to Ukraine across the political spectrum has been so strange. We're in this odd sphere where all of a sudden, leftists, America Firsters, and libertarian anti-war folk find common ground. Strange times make for strange bedfellows, I suppose. Not that they're agreeing for the same reason. Libertarians, I can understand, they dislike a bloated state and interventionism. They're at least consistent. Though admittedly, I find the left's position rather bewildering. They hate America, but love exporting the corporate-sponsored leftist rubbish on a global scale, which brings us neatly to its most toxic of exports, the Rainbow Coalition. I'll be honest, I abhor these creatures. I think they are the symptom of a society lavished in degenerate decadence. Their mere existence is a sign of sickness and our civilization being in decline. Looking at this group, You don't need eagle-eyed vision to see there's an insidious, powerful lobby behind it, pushing this into the machine, and you need to purge these people from your society, because tolerating it is what got them this far. So tolerance is not an option, which leaves you with 3 scenarios. You can leave them alone, in which case they will keep pushing and upend civilization and the coherent social order. Not viable. The best you can hope for is a groundswell of support from the middle. This is your most difficult position, admittedly, because it requires the middle to take the slings and arrows they will inevitably get for speaking out against it. You need the silent majority to be a little less silent, and it's a challenge gathering the energy to galvanize that larger group. But once mobilized, it's quite a force. The last one is if you let them run unopposed and you don't get the groundswell of support from the middle, you will give birth to a proportional extreme on the other end, who says, "Give me the power and I shall cleanse society of this ill." And don't think that option won't rear its head. It will. There will come a point where the masses will look to someone to do something, because when no one else is offering to tackle the problem, the extreme will become viable. There's a saying, the longer you leave a problem, the more expensive it is to fix. Or in political terms, the longer you leave a problem, the more extreme becomes the final solution. And all 3 have their downsides. First makes a problem bigger and offers nothing. The second, the mobilized masses can and also do tremendous damage. And the third option produces order, which is appealing to many, many people. And this is my biggest problem with libertarianism. And I like libertarianism. But it's conceptualized on a certain level of abstraction that frankly isn't compatible with the real world. The idea of you can do whatever you want as long as you aren't harming somebody else, that idea, broadly spread to encompass humans in mass, is too basic, and it's not strong enough to maintain without some enforcement mechanism. Just because you extend the olive branch of understanding doesn't mean those who you extend it to won't beat you with it. You may operate on the assumption of live and let live, they aren't harming me, so I'm not that bothered about it, but that may well destroy everything else around you. If you're going to establish this kind of a society, it requires your citizenry to hold and maintain a high level of morality and principle to keep the society stable. And Michael Malice points out something about Mises. He was an old-school libertarian, so there's a specific social order around him that exists in his time of his conception of libertarianism. So if you're going to try and live by that standard, then that specific social order is also something you have to recreate. This is why I became a monarchist, because that aspect of your society, that cornerstone of principle, requires an instrument of grand authority to protect it. It needs to be this beautiful piece of art held high, under guard 24/7, that you must protect against any encroaching threat with an absolutist position. That is the natural order of civilization that binds it. And I'll end this with a great quote by H.L. Mencken. "What arse first let loose the doctrine that the suffrage is a high boon and voting is a noble privilege?" Wise words. And that's all for today. Until next time.